Thank you, Evan. That was wonderful. So, I am Dr. Crystal Heath, and I am the co founder of Veterinarians Against Ventilation Shutdown. Has anybody heard of what ventilation shutdown is? Yeah, it's awful. This is how we mass kill poultry birds during this avian influenza outbreak. We're sealing up buildings, pumping in heat and steam, and waiting for the birds inside to die. And we've killed 180 million poultry birds this way because of due to the avian influenza outbreak in an attempt to stop the spread. So I'll talk a little bit about that. I'm also on the board of LEAP, which is Leaders for Ethics, Animals, and the Planet. And we are known as the humane alternative to 4-H. Do you know what 4-H is? This is, I used to be a member of 4-H. I was the vice president of my 4-H club. We raised goats and chickens, and then when I discovered that I'd have to kill my baby boy goats if my goats gave birth to boys, I decided not to breed my goats. So my dairy goats were just pets after that. I'm also a horsey person. I grew up riding horses and thought I was going to be a horse vet. And then in vet school, I realized the vast majority of horse people were not in alignment with my beliefs. I viewed my horses as members of my family, and a lot of people were raising horses for as race horses and other sports, and they viewed them as a way to get ego, rewards, and trophies and these things. And I just did not really like that very much. So a lot of people ask, why aren't more veterinarians vegan? And that's the same reason that a lot of people aren't vegan. Why are dog lovers not vegan? Why are cat lovers not vegan? It's because we just don't think that we can be healthy on an animal free diet. And who goes to vet school? I find that most vegans and animal rights activists self select against entering the profession because they initially love animals. Everybody considers being a veterinarian if they love animals and they're younger. And then they start on that route and they have to take classes that involve killing animals. In order to proceed, you have to take these labs, physiology labs that often involve killing frogs and other animals, and so they decide to stop their career and stop pursuit of becoming a veterinarian. So they self-select against entering the profession. And veterinary schools, there's a lot of gatekeeping against vegans and animal rights activists in veterinary schools. Who are the people who are on these admissions committees deciding who can be veterinarians? These are pork producers, people working in animal experimentation. One person who sat on a veterinary school admissions committee said a vegan would get into vet school over his dead body. Still, some vegans and animal rights activists do get into vet school, but they're taught to be quiet about their beliefs. That if they were to be more open about them, that would threaten their career opportunities. And there's also this belief in the veterinary profession, and I think this is a belief that even vegans share, that consumer demand is what's driving demand for meat. And that in order to change the system, we have to change consumers' behavior. But that's not true, actually. The meat industry does not rely on innate consumer demand for their products. They create demand for their products through billions of dollars of marketing, and a lot of that is publicly subsidized marketing. So this is me again with my horse. So this is an example of one of the slides that we get in our veterinary education. We are told that animal rights activists are extremists. They're against us owning animals. They're against rodeos, horse racing, circuses. And we often misinform the public and use violence in order to receive donations for their organizations to help animals. So we're taught that animal rights activists are often lying. And they're not necessarily wrong. I think a lot of animal rights activists do get it wrong because the industry keeps a lot of their practices secret. And once we go into vet school, we realize, oh, this is the way things work. The animal rights activists were wrong about calves being a waste product of the dairy industry. Vegans often repeat this, that calves are just a waste product of the dairy industry. That's not true. In fact, Many dairies make more money selling beef calves than they do by selling milk. So that's just like one of the things that vegans say that kind of loses our own credibility because we just don't know these practices. So why should veterinarians and animal rights activists get together? We've shown in the past that when we join together, we're actually very successful. And this is an example of this. Shelter euthanasia rates have plummeted because we've professionalized the profession of shelter medicine. Instead of bullying and shaming shelter vets who are stuck in this system where they're having to euthanize large numbers of animals who are stuck in cages in these municipal shelters, they are now joining with people in the community who love animals to create more rescues, more transfer partners that these municipal shelters can give these animals to. Members of the community have started spay-neuter clinics and partnered with veterinarians to get more animals spayed and neutered, which reduces shelter intake. So this is an example of the success of animal rights activists and veterinarians joining together to help solve this problem. And we can do the exact same thing, decreasing the production of animal-based protein using the same model of activists and veterinarians joining together to dismantle consumer trust and confidence in this method of protein production. But how do we do that? So the veterinary profession is already grappling with this problem of the fact that most Americans cannot afford veterinary bills. If you have an emergency with your pet and you go to the emergency clinic, it's going to cost you at many places a minimum of $1,000, and most Americans can't afford that. And sadly, many veterinarians are struggling and having to euthanize animals who they could save because their people can't afford the cost of veterinary care. And why is it increasing so much in cost? Is it greedy veterinarians? No, it's private equity firms buying up small independent practices and then raising the costs so that their CEOs and their shareholders can make money. The exact same thing that's going on with the animal-based protein industry. And what I do is I do high quality, high volume spay neuter. I spay neuter about 150 animals a week. I think this is the answer. This is the way out of this massive problem of animals being sent to shelters and euthanizing them. But a lot of vets repeat these thought-stopping cliches when I bring up the fact that we need to expand access to publicly funded veterinary care, because the clinics that I work out of are publicly funded. They are funded by the city, and the city realized this is where we should invest our money because it saves more money to spay, neuter animals and to provide veterinary care for animals than it does to put these animals in the shelter. But a lot of vets repeat this when I bring up this fact. They say, having a pet is a luxury. And if you can't afford the vet, then you can't afford the pet. But of course, most of us get our animals as rescues. We are taking responsibility for other members of society, and cats are other members of society that we feel compelled to take care of. There's the cat distribution theory. You've gotten a cat, like the universe has gifted you a cat, and now it's your duty to take care of them. These are members of society, and that's the ethic that we need to instill in the veterinary profession that I'm working to instill in my colleagues. So animal shelters are crowded because of the high cost of veterinary care, and animals are being relinquished to the shelter. What's the answer? To provide publicly funded veterinary care before these animals end up in the shelter. But veterinarians are committing suicide. We have a high rate of suicide because we're dealing in this system, end-stage capitalism, where our patients are products. Our patients are property, and dealing with this is extremely hard. And it's hard on us, and we don't have the language to verbalize it because we've been taught through vet school and all of these things. We are here to serve owners, and pets are a luxury, and if they can't afford it, then that's on them. We have to be hard-hearted about it and make tough choices and euthanize animals because that's just the way things are. And it doesn't have to be that way. And a lot of us working in animal shelters and in these nonprofit rescue groups, we run into animal hoarding a lot. And this is another problem. We are prosecuting old ladies who end up rescuing too many animals and then can't care for them, is locking those women up in handcuffs, those people up in handcuffs because they care and they're trying to solve a problem that society hasn't cared for. Is that the answer? No, absolutely not. Meanwhile, the rich are getting richer. And who is actually committing the most crimes against animals? It's these families, the Mars family. The Mars family owns Banfield, PetSmart, all these pet food companies. They are the richest family in the world. Merck is an animal pharmaceutical company. The Merck family, $81 billion. Boehringer Ingelheim, this is an animal pharmaceutical company. Cargill Macmillan is the biggest agribusiness company in the world. They profit from feeding slaughter-bound animals and they profit from slaughtering these animals. All of these companies depend on animal-based protein production, animal research, and pharmaceutical companies. If we were to decrease the number of slaughter-bound animals, their profits would suffer. And there is a lot of money in protecting and increasing the number of slaughter-bound animals, because if we were to decrease that, all of these families would lose money. So I don't know what happened there. This is how I'm holding some of these companies accountable. So this is a video that I captured at a large dairy, and this dairy worker was hitting this cow. Now, I'm not about going after dairy workers because these people are part of this system. They're not the problem. Who's the problem is the billionaires at the top who created the system that forces this worker into a system where he has to have callous disregard for these animals. So here's another video of just showing the problem at this dairy, and all of these cows are coming out of the milking parlor. You'll notice the vast majority of them are lame. They're very dirty. They have nasal discharge. This dairy tested positive for avian influenza. And this is months later. The cows are still sick. They're still extremely skinny. The dairy industry says that 98% of their dairies adhere to national dairy farm standards. This video is proof that this dairy does not. And they have a problem. The vast majority of these cows are suffering lameness, respiratory disease, they're thin, and this dairy man in the background is not treating their cows very well. So we filed a complaint with the Kern County Animal Services. You think of animal services, you think of dogs and cats, going after that old lady who's hoarding too many animals. But in various jurisdictions, animal services has the responsibility and the obligation to go after animal agriculture facilities too. They just don't know it. A lot of law enforcement just don't know the law. And so we have to inform them of, you actually can go after these facilities if you know the law. So unfortunately, contact was made. This is very vague. I'm going to continue documenting what's going on at this dairy and continue to ask them to take action. But there was another thing, sorry, trigger warning. I don't want to keep that on too long, but I've documented over the months dead cows that they left on the side of the road by this dairy for the rendering truck to pick up. Then I saw a decaying carcass in one of their dirt piles, and I realized they're actually just burying these cows, and that's against California law. So I contacted the water board, and now the water board is taking action against them. And these are things all of us can do. Like, you don't need to be anybody special to go to a dairy and just watch and document and see what's going on and file complaints. So instead of just telling people to go vegan and being vegan yourself, in order to combat those billion-dollar corporations, we have to do a little bit more than that to dismantle the system. This is a New Yorker article that came out the other day. I don't know if you saw this, but one of our veterinary whistleblowers who worked at the Alpha Genesis primate lab in South Carolina reached out to me months before and said, this place is a disaster. The climate control doesn't work. The cages are rusty. The monkeys are getting out. The monkeys, their livers are cirrhosed. from years of experimentation, how on earth are we possibly doing any good research on these primates who are diseased and stressed? And she ended up filing complaints with the USDA. The USDA did nothing. She ended up being fired when she complained too much. And luckily, the New Yorker picked this up, wrote this article about her and other people who worked at the private laboratory. This is the lab where 40 monkeys escaped. So unfortunately, too late, still no action has been taken against this laboratory. It's a horrible lab. So more things need to be done. This place needs to be shut down, but at least the story is getting out. The ball's moving on this a little bit. This is another veterinarian who worked at a zoo, and she identified with this story. And this is, you think, zoo vets, a lot of us animal rights activists might be very questioning, very skeptical of zoo vets, because like, how could you work in a zoo with these animals that are confined in cages? I find them to be some of the most compassionate, forward-thinking people who are there because they realize it's a problem and they want to be there for the animals to help them. And they think they can change things. They think they can make it better. They think that maybe they can turn these zoos into sanctuaries, and then they are beaten down by the system. And the people who run these zoos, who are often very narcissistic people who are just in it for the money and don't really care about the animals. So more and more zoo vets too are joining together to speak out and realizing that there's a huge need for change here. So when people go to the vet and are like, this is too expensive, why isn't this cheaper? It's not the vet's fault. Vets want free vet care too. And I think this is something we can really, if we can get veterinarians off this idea that animals are a luxury and if you can't afford the vet, you can't afford the pet, understand that this is part of what we can offer the world is providing healthcare to animals. But in order to do that, vets can't work for free. We go to school for 8 years, $200,000 in debt I graduated with, and we don't make very much money. We need to encourage government agencies to pay for this. You say, that's outrageous. How are governments going to decide to pay for veterinary care? We don't even pay for human medical care. We already are doing this. This is actually what our clinic costs, about $110 for a cat neuter, cat spay. Dog spay is $245. A dog spay is $275 for a big one. And we do dentals and all of this stuff. So this is part of it's publicly funded, but we're already doing publicly funded veterinary care for large corporations, and I'll go into that a little bit more later too. But it saves money for governments, for cities to fund access to care rather than to fund shelters. For a state like California, the average cost to spay neuter is about $160 per animal. And that's just the veterinarian's cost. That's not what you pay. I don't think you can go to any public clinic and get a spay for $160. But to house, feed, clean, medical care, or adopt out or euthanize is in the $900 to $2,000 range for every animal that enters the shelter. And a 2014 study found that there was a 66% decrease in shelter cat impoundment in 2 years in the studied area, attributed to fewer kittens being born when they implemented a spay-neuter program. This is a paper that I published in the Journal of Veterinary Medical Education. And this paper looked at how many animals veterinary schools are killing in order to train their students. So we got public records from all of the veterinary schools in the United States, their IAPIC protocols, which are their institutional animal care and use protocols, and we calculated for each school, tabulated how many animals are killed. And our vision is we need to switch these schools to an access to care model where veterinarians are performing procedures and surgeries on animals who need it under the guidance of experienced surgeons, instead of killing animals for students to learn on. And this is what I did. I was a conscientious objector to animal killing in veterinary school. We had a community surgery program where people would bring in their animals to us to do procedures on. I did a mastectomy on a dog. I did a FHO, which is a femoral head osteotomy on a hip of a dog. And it was good surgeries. I had a surgeon there watching me, making sure I did everything right. The animals got good pain control afterwards. So what was that? Sorry. So I think this is the future for what veterinary schools need to be, instead of just buying animals from biosciences companies and then killing them for students to practice these things on. But when students do speak out and try to conscientiously object, they are bullied and retaliated against for voicing concerns. And this is Dr. Stephanie Fraisel, who went to Auburn University, and her story is on our blog. And she received an F. She suffered PTSD from being a conscientious objector to this bull who was going to be operated on. They were going to remove a bunch of body parts and then kill him afterwards. And she thought this was very disrespectful. But now she is a vet and she's doing great, and she didn't suffer from not performing that procedure on that bull. She suffered from their reaction to her trying to follow her conscience. Now I train veterinary students in the Navajo Nation. I've been to Fiji 3 times, and we train students on animals who actually need surgery, and they are guided by me in learning how to do this. And I think, and this meets that need for spay-neuter in these areas, while also providing that hands-on training, which is so much more valuable than practicing on an animal who's just going to be killed. There are 30 to 80 million free-roaming cats in the U.S. If each of those females gives birth, we're talking an additional 105 to 280 million cats in the US. About 75% of those kittens born end up dying, but still, that would mean 4 to 12 cats a day is what veterinarians would need to spay and neuter in order to keep up with this demand if all of those cats lived. So we definitely need more veterinarians doing spay-neuter work, and there's far too few veterinarians doing this kind of work. One Health, this is what we're taught in veterinary school, that human, animal, plant, and environmental health are all interconnected. So if we provide access to care for animals, we not only help the animals, but we help ourselves too. We create a more courageous community that is not normalized to violence against animals. We are empowered to take action instead of just being callous and having callous disregard for those other members of society. But what does this do to us? So in Los Angeles and all over the country, but Los Angeles got on this. I'm from Los Angeles. We realized that cats were getting sick and dying from eating raw pet food. There are avian influenza infected poultry birds and cows making their way into the food supply. And cats are eating these bodies in the raw food, and many cats got sick and died from it. This is this avian influenza outbreak that I talked about. More than 180 million birds have been killed, but I also suspect there are birds making it to slaughter that are infected with H5N1. This is just recently, it's still going on. November 6th was the last outbreak in Elkhart, Indiana. Fair Oaks Farms is out there, which I visited. And this is how, I don't want to make you watch this, but this is a study done at North Carolina State University where they put these birds in boxes, sealed them up, and waited to see how long it would take for those birds to die. And that study was used to legitimize ventilation shutdown as a method of mass killing. And that's what the American Veterinary Medical Association used to legitimize this practice. And the USDA looks to the AVMA guidelines in order to reimburse these companies when they kill their animals this way. So they don't have to put plans in place to use natural methods of killing. Their lack of planning means they can use ventilation shutdown, and they get millions of dollars of money when they kill their birds this way. And this chart is just alternative. When everybody asks me if I go to non-vegan places and talk about this, they're like, what's a better way to do it? There are better, less cruel ways to do it. I never say more humane, I just say less cruel, and that's using nitrogen. When you fill a place with nitrogen, either gas or foam, that decreases the oxygen. They breathe in the nitrogen, they become hypoxemic, they pass out in a few seconds and die a few minutes later. So it's a much less cruel than taking 8 hours or more sometimes to kill them with ventilation shutdown. It's just awful. This is the guidelines for depopulation that legitimizes all of these methods. So when people voice concerns about ventilation shutdown, the producers maintain consumer trust and confidence in this industry by saying, we are using veterinarian approved methods to kill these animals. Like, you're supposed to be okay with that now because veterinarians say it's okay. And this is the AVMA got this $36,000 grant from the USDA to create these guidelines to set USDA policy for how these animals are killed. And this is an email we received via FOIA request. This is a Freedom of Information Act request of the National Pork Board. And it basically says how they were concerned that using ventilation shutdown, they could be charged with criminal animal cruelty. Because like in Minnesota, if you seal up an animal without ventilation, that's a crime. And they said, I do suggest to our state execs to study animal cruelty laws in their states to determine if there would be liability to prosecution if they practice VSD or even mass euthanasia. That's why it's so important to have the AVMA saying it's okay. So now it's industry standard practice to do what would be criminal animal cruelty. And here is the head of the American Association of Swine Veterinarians saying how important it is that the AVMA says this is okay. Coming from the AVMA, it's going to take a veterinary perspective rather than a producer's perspective. And I think that's what we want for producers. It will provide the professional support for what we are likely going to have to do. And this is Jen Sorensen, who is the spokesperson for Iowa Select Farms. Iowa Select Farms killed their pigs using ventilation shutdown back in 2020 during the COVID-19 outbreak and the slaughterhouse bottleneck because workers were sick with COVID and couldn't go to work. So that slowed slaughter line speeds. And Iowa Select Farms decided to mass kill their pigs using this method. And Ben Sorensen said, veterinarians, production and well-being professionals are overseeing the process to ensure accordance with the American Association of Swine Veterinarians and the American Veterinary Medical Association. So we started Veterinarians Against Ventilation Shutdown, and over 2,000 veterinarians have now signed on, asking the AVMA to reclassify this method as not recommended. Did the AVMA listen? No. We submitted petitions to the AVMA House of Delegates. They even changed their House of Delegates manual to prevent petitions like ours from going forward. They banned me and other veterinarians from going to their Cargill-sponsored Humane Ending Symposium. They prevented me from speaking at the SAVMA Symposium. They prevented me from even having a table there after I was accepted to speak there. They prevented me from going to the AVMA legislative fly-in. I'm a longtime member of the AVMA, and they just flat out barred me from going to all of those things. This was a meme that went around all the veterinary Facebook groups saying, beware, Crystal Heath is a dangerous animal rights activist who means nothing good for our profession. They point out how I'm on all these 4-H and equestrian Facebook groups, like because I was a former 4-H'er and equestrian, and they spread this narrative that I'm basically a danger and a terrorist. Glenn Greenwald, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, did this story about me, and he goes through how they surveilled and punished me and other veterinarians. I was on his show. Still, that wasn't good enough for the AVMA to this day. They're still bullying and retaliating against me. I stay a member just so I can continue to point out all of the ways that they are blocking me, and they're not following their mission. This is a nonprofit. They have a mission to protect veterinarians and animals, and they're not doing that. So I talked about publicly funded veterinary care and how outrageous that would be, right? Like, we don't even publicly fund human healthcare in a lot of situations, but we're already doing that for these billion-dollar corporations. They built this huge lab in Manhattan, Kansas. This is the new Plum Island, and it's studying farm animal diseases and vaccination. So this is a publicly funded, huge institution where they're doing research for the benefit of food and laboratory animals. If I get a cat into my clinic who I suspect has avian influenza H5N1, My cost to test that cat is either $107 for the AGID test or $213 for the PCR. If this was a farmed animal owned by a billion-dollar corporation, they would pay $4.25 at a state-run laboratory. The PCR would cost $56, and a LISA test would be $2, and virus isolation is $92. And what is this? Oh, the multi-species antibody test is $4.25 each. And if your dairy is infected with avian influenza and your cow isn't producing as much milk, the loss of milk production is paid for by taxpayers, by us. If you're vegan, a lot of vegans say, stop paying for this, right? You can stop paying for this if you choose not to drink dairy anymore. That's not true. You're forced to pay these companies, whether you like it or not. And some people say, oh no, I only drink local humane milk. That's great. You're still paying for the dairies with the worst animal welfare practices. And so they're reimbursed for testing. Even though the testing can be done for $2 a cow, they're still reimbursed even more than that. And just 1 milliliter of avian influenza infected milk has 1 billion virus particles. And that's enough virus in those cows to infect tens of thousands. Just that 1 milliliter broke down in those cows. And one cow has enough virus to infect pretty much every animal on the planet, but enough to infect tens of thousands of poultry birds. And so this is what the Central Valley of California looks like. You have a poultry facility. This is Central Valley Eggs, one of the nation's largest cage-free egg producers. All these birds are kept in buildings. Right across from Poso Creek Family Dairy, a huge dairy. So Poso Creek Family Dairy was infected with avian influenza. A few weeks later, Central Valley Eggs tested positive for avian influenza, and they had to depopulate 2 million poultry birds. They got $10 million of our money to do that. But all this avian influenza is happening in the dairies. The National Cattlemen's Beef Association wanted to maintain consumer confidence in this industry, and they confirmed there is no threat to human health. Milk and meat remain safe to consume. The USDA has confirmed that the affected dairy cows do not appear to be transmitting the virus to other cows within the same herd. All of these turned out to be false. Yes, human dairy workers were getting sick. The meat and the milk was not safe, especially not raw. Cats are getting sick from eating the raw meat. And the USDA, they did find that cows were spreading it to other cows. And they previously said only about 10% of the affected dairy herds seems to get infected with H5N1, and the cows aren't dying. They bounce back to health within a couple of weeks. That I had to go on, I'm sorry, I should have trigger warned, but I went on the ground with the Central Valley to confirm that was not true. Nobody else was doing this, which I was shocked. But I drove to the Central Valley and saw piles of dead cows on the side of the road, sent my photos to journalists. They confirmed with those dairymen. So now the dairy industry was forced to change their narrative. No longer was it, oh, just a mild disease, no cows were dying. They had to change their language that so many cows were dying, in fact, that the rendering trucks were backed up, which was why there were piles of dead bodies on the side of the road. And this activist, Dr. Crystal Heath, was taking advantage of their plight to further her agenda. How dare I? But this made major headlines. Newsweek kind of broke the story of how many cows were dying from this. Vanity Fair did an article, and they interviewed a bunch of veterinarians to describe this bungled response and how veterinarians, who, when they were asking for testing of these cows, they were being threatened with being fired and losing their contracts. Here's examples of the raw food that was infected with avian influenza and other diseases. So these companies, these billion-dollar companies that are getting our money and getting free diagnostics, are contaminating and infecting our animals. And who has to pay when our animals get sick from it? We do. Is that fair? I don't think so. More contamination with salmonella and other diseases. So poultry companies have received Now this is old data. Now it's well over 2 billion. But Jenny Turkey Store used to be the one who got the most money, 120 million. And now the Trump administration has raised the amount that we're paying these egg producers from $7 a bird to $17 a bird. We have to pay them when their birds get sick and when they have to mass kill their birds. We are paying $17 a bird for those birds that are killed. That and 73% of all dairy revenues, according to this dairy industry study. This isn't animal rights activist propaganda. This is the dairy industry's own study. 73% of dairy revenue comes from some form of subsidy. So you have to pay the worst dairies, whether you like it or not. And this reminds me of the lab-grown diamond thing. I just thought this was really funny. We created how to grow real diamonds that are cheaper and better quality than the real thing. And so many people are still like, no thanks, it's the suffering that makes it special. So yeah, there's two different philosophies of veterinary medicine. The old model is man at the top, which really it should be corporations at the top, and women, other animals ranked below that on order of moral concern to us. But One Health teaches us all life is interconnected. I also do a lot of photojournalism, and I was recently arrested documenting ICE protests in Los Angeles. This is another, thank you. I went to court. They haven't filed charges. They just said they have a year to file charges against me. The charge is a misdemeanor failure to disperse. I was a member of the media. The police would not accept my proof that I was a member of the media. The police didn't even know the law. And that's the thing. These people in charge of enforcing the laws do not understand the laws. And I'm a member of the LA Press Club. The LA Press Club sued the LAPD and the Department of Homeland Security, and they won. And it's just an injunction, and now the police just aren't allowed to brutalize us anymore. If you want to check out more of our press, ouronor.org/press. We had 87 press hits last year, so we're really combating some of this industry propaganda. The Vanity Fair article, the USDA said that this avian influenza virus is just going to burn itself out. It's still happening. This is an article I wrote in Time magazine with Gene Bauer about the avian influenza outbreak, so you can check that out. We started this group called Veterinarians United, veterinariansunited.org. It's to help mobilize veterinarians for various animal advocacy campaigns. We have weekly live streams where we talk about animal news and what you can do, and FOIA Friday, that's Freedom of Information Act Friday. And any questions, you can reach out to me at cheath@ouronor.org. And I'm also happy to answer any questions here if I have time. Thank you. Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I've been following, I haven't gone to Skid Row yet, but I've been following some people who are doing that work, and it's absolutely awful. And it just shows how like interconnected it all is. There are people trying to breed dogs just to try to make money to sell them. And there's people, they are addicted to drugs. A lot of these people were released from prison and they are put there, and nobody is taking care of them. It's just, yeah, it's, I don't know what the answer, we just like, it's outrageous that the LAPD is arresting me for documenting a protest when there's that happening on Skid Row. And people, I'm not saying imprison people, I'm saying help them get the help. And how do you do that? It's a challenging situation, but yeah. Yes? Yeah. Yeah, she said, I thought they passed laws saying it's illegal to take pictures of facilities. Yeah, in some states it is, so check your various state. I don't know what Florida laws are, but they've been also overturned in a lot of places. So that's also an important point too. I think people should photograph, get charged, and fight the law, like in court, and so that, because somebody needs to challenge it and say this is unconstitutional, actually, and that's how it's been overturned. Yep.
a master's in vet tech, and she said that she had the right to spay neuter on her own. So why not?
As a vet tech, she could spay neuter on her own. Oh yeah, the veterinary. Yeah. The problem we're running into right now is there's not actually a shortage of veterinarians who are able to do spay neuter, but there's a shortage of assistants to help them. And I think we need to get more RVT, registered veterinary technicians, training, and because it costs like $20,000 to go to vet tech school, which is outrageous, and they don't make very much money. And we need to encourage more people to go to vet tech school to help these veterinarians. But also, spay neuter is really hard, and I think I don't think that you can adequately be trained to do that in a short program like that, because there's so much involved in it. Like maybe you could neuter a cat, but that's not where the bottleneck is. Like that we mainly need more support staff so veterinarians can spay and neuter more animals. And I just worry it devalues our patients' lives if we're having people do this. Like already, pigs on farms are castrated by veterinarians. They're castrated by farmers and farm workers with no anesthesia, no training. They just rip out the testicles and they do all of these things. So if I would like to make that legal or something. But yeah, it's a complicated thing. Oh, sorry. Thank you.
So thank you, Crystal, Heath, for coming to speak. This has been very informative. Really loved listening to your presentation. Again, if anyone has a question that they would like to ask her right now before you leave, we have another speaker that's coming in within 15 minutes. We have a speaker's tent over to the left. And Crystal, if there's anyone sitting over there, we need to make space. Hey, Ted, could you go over and make sure? Thanks.